Girl down on my knees. These little words I begin to sing. I be Lord, please help us.
Hi everyone, this video covers the installation of the Alpha and Bravo roof rack for the 2007 to 2021 LC200 Toyota Land Cruiser. Before you tear into your packaging, I know you're excited and ready to go, but we've got to get the factory roof rack off this vehicle no matter what we're going to do. We need to remove that thing, get it out of the way, and clear space for our new roof rack. The mounting sub-assemblies for the Alpha and Bravo are the exact same. They're going to anchor to the same parts on the vehicle. They connect to the same load bars on both roof racks. So we're going to complete those steps now. Watch this section of the video no matter which roof rack you're installing, whether it's Alpha or Bravo, and then you'll proceed to the section of the video that covers that specific roof rack to get you guys all bolted up, dialed in, and on the trail. The removal of the factory roof rack just takes a couple basic hand tools. You need a little miniature pry tool or a beaver tail style pry tool, 10 millimeter and 12 millimeter socket. So let's get that stuff together and go get this factory roof rack off and out of our way. The OEM roof rack on your Land Cruiser connects at 3 major points on the vehicle. There are 2 bolts underneath this cosmetic cap at the rear. There's 1 main bolt behind the cap at the middle of the rack, and then 2 auxiliary bolts that connect a bracket to the roof that we also need to remove. And then finally, up here at the front, there are 2 more bolts underneath this cosmetic cap. We've got to remove this trim cap, this center trim cap, and this rear trim cap to access those bolts. So I'll be using a little bit of both pry tools here to try and get access to this thing. I'm going to start by grabbing underneath that one of those notches and twisting my larger tool up underneath it to try and pop it loose. So once I've got it separated there, I'll stick my other tool in it to keep it from locking back in place and go work at the other notch at the rear. And you saw it just pop itself loose there. I want to show you guys, don't just yank this thing straight up. There's 2 little retainer like keepers up here at the front. You just need to slide it back out like that. Those are those 2 fingers right there that I was talking about in that area, and that exposes the 2 bolts at the rear. The middle one, there's no seam all the way around this. This is all one piece. The seam is actually back here at the back corner. And so if I take I've got the smaller pry tool here. If I just wedge my pry tool in between there, I can pop it loose like that and then just click it out and remove it. And you're freeing up, just so you guys see it so you know what you're dealing with. You're trying to manipulate it to free up those 2 little tangs right there that are locking onto this inside lip of this plastic. This is the 12 millimeter bolt that you'll need to remove in the middle. The front retainer or cosmetic cap is very much the same as the rear. This is the outside of the vehicle, and I don't want to work out here. It's got those 2 same notches on the back side in here. So I can get my pry tool in place. And then just like at the other one, I'll wedge my small pry tool between the seam on the plastic and use it to get room for this guy to get underneath. So got that one is released. There it goes. So once it's up, just slide it forward to release those 2 fingers right there, and you have access to your 2 front bolts. So go ahead and get your 12 millimeter ratchet socket and a 10 mil, and we'll take these bolts out. I'm up at the front of the vehicle right now. I've got my socket rail. I need a 12 millimeter for the larger main bolts at the front. I'll give you guys some insight. This truck is a 2016, and these bolts, I've already taken apart the other side. These bolts are extraordinarily tight, and they are absolutely just caked in Loctite. It's going to make a lot of noise when it comes apart. You'll hear it popping and shit like that. That's just the thread locker releasing every time you turn that ratchet. What's critical on this truck is that you do not take out one bolt or the other. You simply loosen both of them and then work your way, like put a turn on this bolt, then a turn on that bolt. Same thing here, and work your way out. That thread locker has those retainers inside the roof rail of the truck so tight that if you take this bolt out completely and then you start to work on this one, that retainer's just going to slide, rotate around inside of the truck, and it's gone forever. So I'll work on this one, and like I said, I'm just going to break them both loose, and then I'll just gently work them out a little bit at a time, kind of stair-stepping my way up until I've got both bolts out. So I can tell you that the back bolt is much harder to turn than this front bolt is right now. And if I want to show you what I'm talking about why you can't just take one out and then the other. When I wiggle this one, see the other bolt moving too? See that? There's a retainer underneath there, and I've got one out of the truck, so I'll show you guys what that looks like. But we don't want to lose those retainers in the roof of the truck. If you do have those retainers fall down in the vehicle, they're virtually impossible to put back in place, and you'll have to install the plus nuts we include with your kit. But I want to show you guys a factory retainer, and this is your best chance at having it not fall into the roof of the truck. So, got that one worked pretty well, that one. And again, just back and forth and back and forth. Do not remove just one. You're going to be in a world of hurt here if you do. So I've got them to where I can spin them both by hand now. So they're both out. Look at all that thread locker on there. That's why those things are as hard to get out as they are. So those are your two front bolts. We were able to keep the retainer in place. I'll show it when we remove the roof rack. Now I'm going to go do the same thing at the rear. At the rear of the vehicle, same thing. There's two bolts here. I'm going to lock on with that 12mm first, and I'm going to loosen it. Then I want to loosen the other one. And you guys will find this out when you do yours. These things are tight. So put a few turns on the front bolt, then a few turns on the rear. And just like the front, I want to work my way back and forth so that I don't allow that retainer, the threaded insert piece inside your vehicle, to spin out of position. Okay, so my rear ones are, they're really both loose now, and I can spin them both by hand. So now I just want to kind of gently remove both of them at the same time. And again, there's all that factory thread locker that we were fighting. Now we're ready to go do the middle. At the midsection, I first need to remove this 12mm bolt in here. And it's much shorter than the others. So pull that guy out. Now I'm going to lift the factory roof rack up out of the way to gain access to these two 10mm bolts that are holding this this extension arm up that this center section was bolted into. These two bolts are 10mm, so let's remove those. And I didn't find these 10mm bolts to be overly tight at all. They're definitely still M8 thread like the others, but they have a 10 millimeter head on them instead of a 12. So once I've got those loose, then you just kind of give the bracket a wiggle and you pull the 2 bolts out with the bracket. They're not attached, they'll fall right out. But that frees up the threaded locations here. We've got one more step to do. If you follow from the middle foot forward, there's a cap here and it's got arrows on it. You want to pry and remove this cap, and it's going to expose 2 more sets of factory threads. You take your pry tool over that factory cap, you've got the arrows on the piece. Take that pry tool and just snap that backwards and lift it up out of the way. That's going to expose the last 2 10 millimeter bolts that hold on that clip. So we're going to go ahead and take these out now. And remove that clip. This area is for another mounting foot. So now the factory roof rack is still up here, but we've got the factory mount point. Then we have the one that was underneath the cover, the one for the middle foot on the factory roof rack, and then the 2 at the rear. So if you guys have gotten this far and you didn't have any issues with your factory threaded inserts, you can proceed with the rest of the foot installation video. If you did have trouble with the factory inserts and you know that they fell down in the roof rack, continue watching this video and I'm going to show you guys how to deal with that. So if you're watching this part of the video, odds are you took 1 bolt out or you used an impact wrench, which you should never do. You pulled 1 bolt, and then when you went to do the other, this absolute pain in the ass factory threaded insert piece sheared off its retainer, spun around inside of the roof, and then once you finally got the bolt out, it fell down in the headliner. I had to remove the headliner pretty much all the way on the passenger side to dig this guy out. And because of that, I don't think that if yours released like this, I don't think in your driveway that most of you are going to get this back in place. There's airbags up in there and a bunch of other stuff in the way. You can't really get your hand up in there to lock that little retainer clip back in place. So your kit includes some M6 Plus nuts for this exact scenario. I don't want to slow you guys down. I don't want to stop you. I don't want you to have to go back to a body shop or the dealership to have these put back in. I think it would be very expensive. So we've prepped your hardware kit with a contingency plan for when this happens. I want you to grab the kit with the plus nuts and the tools that we'll go over here in a second, and you guys are going to install plus nuts in the holes where these factory inserts spun out. You will need to, if this happened, you will need to release enough of the headliner to reach up in there and get these out, because they'll just bang around inside the roof of the truck forever and the rattle will drive you insane. But I don't want you guys to try and fight them back in place. I just really don't think the average guy with a basic set of hand tools could get these back where they go. The good news is for this that because of the size of the factory hole, there's no drilling required to install this if the factory inserts did in fact slip out of the way. What you need is the hardware that shipped with your plus nut kit. So it's the longer hex bolt with the flat washers. You need a 10 millimeter box end wrench like this. Just kind of slide that together like that. Put the other washer over those threads and then hand thread that plus nut on so that your assembly looks like this right here. Okay. Then we're going to line this up with that factory hole. It's just going to drop right in. And I take a 10 millimeter socket and I'm just going to operate these things against each other to set these plus nuts right in those factory holes. And instead of spending the next 6 hours trying to reinstall the factory, in about 5 minutes here you're going to have completely suitable threaded inserts in these holes. Save yourself a ton of time. You want to continue to operate that ratchet until it's getting pretty snug right now. It should get almost impossible to turn, and that's when that plus nut will be fully set in place. I'm putting quite a bit of tension on this at this point now, so I think that's going to be my last one. Then just flip your ratchet to reverse, loosen up that bolt, and then remove the bolt and the washer and the wrench. This leaves you guys with a very well set M6 hole that's threaded that you can attach your roof rack to. So anywhere that that factory insert might have slipped out of place, you're going to have 2 holes. At each of those locations, you're going to want to repeat that process and install that plus nut. On this truck particular, it was just the front right that spun on me like this. The rear was fine, and then obviously the 2 remaining middles are always good. They weren't tight at all. So I'm going to put the last plus nut in here, and then we can move on to installing the feet. Before we can install the sealant and the spacers that go underneath the feet, first we need to go ahead and clean the surface around each location, all 8 of your factory mounting locations. I just use a standard aerosol window cleaner and a microfiber. Just spray that area, let it foam up for a bit if you're using this same kind of cleaner, and then take the microfiber and clean the entire area, especially around the threaded sections here, because we're going to be applying a sealant and we want to make sure that we get good adhesion. That's going to make you completely waterproof. So should look like that, not like that. That's filthy and that's clean. So go do that same thing at all 8 locations, and then we'll be ready to install the sealant and the spacers and the bases of the feet. Now that the factory roof rack is out of our way, we're ready to pre-assemble the feet and get them on top of the roof so that we have a base structure to mount our load bars on. Whether you're installing an Alpha or a Bravo roof rack, there's some common steps that take place between the 2 racks, specifically about mating the foot and load bar clamp assembly to the roof of the vehicle. We're going to complete this first part of the video to cover that section of the installation, because it's the same for both roof racks. So whether you have an Alpha or a Bravo, this will be the section that you want to start with. Now that we have the factory roof rack out of the way, let's get the feet and the load bar clamps partially assembled, get them on the vehicle so that we have a platform to attach the first section of load bar to the truck. Your kit ships with 8 load bar clamps and 8 of the bases. I want you to start by taking 6 of the clamps and bases and putting them in their own stack. Those 6 will be set up the exact same way. The remaining 2, which will go to the front of the vehicle, those are going to be a little bit different, so we'll do them last. Ultimately, we'll be installing an Alpha rack on this customer's vehicle, but the first step here is going to be to attach the clamp to the actual base structure itself. And your Alpha and Bravo do ship with different hardware for this. Throughout this video, you're going to see us using the hex head bolts from bag number 8001.4. If you're installing a Bravo rack, it's going to be the button head bolt in the bag of hardware labeled foot to rack. That's the hardware that you'll use for this step for a Bravo. Fundamentally, the idea is the exact same. The primary difference is to fully tighten up the Alpha hardware, you're going to need a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches. And to do the Bravo hardware, you're going to need a 5mm Allen wrench and a 13mm wrench. I'll set a piece of this base and load bar clamp up with both sets of hardware so you guys can kind of see how that works. But again, with us doing an Alpha rack long term, I'm going to go ahead and do the pre-assembly for this roof rack with the Alpha hardware. These feet are designed to give you different adjustable heights based on where the holes align. And for the 6 feet that you've got in your pile here, they're going to mate all the way down like this. So the bottom of this will be almost flush with the base, and the holes will line up like this here. You don't want them up in this position like this. You want them tucked all the way down. For an Alpha roof rack, you're going to slip the hardware through just like that. Flip it towards you. On the back side of that, you're going to place a flat washer and a nylock. There we go. And I don't want to tighten any of this up yet. we want this loose like this so that we can articulate these feet. These two holes are where it'll actually mount to the vehicle, and then your load bar is going to connect to here, but we'll get to that in a second. Go ahead and set 6 of your feet up in this exact same orientation. All the way down, bolts at the top, flat washers on the back with nylocks. If you're doing a Bravo roof rack, the position will be the exact same. The button head bolts will slip through those same holes. You'll rotate it around, install the flat washers, and then finally just hand tighten the nylocks until that little nylon ring engages the threads of that bolt. That is plenty tight for right now. You should be able to kind of move it and manipulate it like this right here. So right now I have 6 clamps that are set up exactly the same, all the way down on the base with the bolts and the flat washers and nylocks started like this. This leaves us an additional 2 bases and 2 load bar clamps. These guys will be set up for the front of the vehicle, so I'm going to move this stuff out of the way, and then using the same hardware, I'll put these together and show you where those go. At the front of the vehicle, to account for the slope of the front of the roof on the LC200, you want to line up your hardware at the bottom of your load bar clamp, but the hardware will still pass through the top bolt holes of the base. So it should look like that. And put your spacers on. Chase down your lock washer, or your nylock rather. Get that started. It should sit like this. It's all the way up at this position. Same thing with the last one. So these are our front 2. You see they're all the way up like that. And again, one more time, if you have Bravo roof rack, it's going to have the button head bolts that we showed earlier in the video. So these 6 will be for the rear, middle, and forward section of the roof rack, and these 2 taller ones will go at the front. Now that we've got the feet pre-assembled, we're ready to install the threaded inserts along the top clamp of the load bar, that long slot at the top of the load bar. And each of these, all 8 of your feet will be set up exactly the same way. Before we can put this hardware in, we've got to apply a little bit of thread locker. So I'm going to reposition the camera and then we'll go over that. Locate the bag of hardware that says foot to load bar and the tube of VC3 thread locker that comes with your kit. I want to take all of the bolts in that kit and I want to apply that thread locker to the last 3 or 4 threads like that on each bolt in that kit. And let that air dry for 10 or 15 minutes until it's no longer wet and runny. So right now if I touch it, it's just stringy and it gets all over my hand. I want to let that set for 10 or 15 minutes until that thread locker has a chance to set up and is no longer sticky to the touch. All 8 of your feet will be set up the exact same way. If you put the load bar clamp assembly in front of you like this, you have these threaded inserts, and if you look, there's a noticeable protrusion on one side and it's flat on the other. Get that in position there, like that. I want the protrusions to face the inside of the load bar clamp, so they should be out here where this big flat section is. Place a lock washer and a flat washer on each bolt, line up that threaded insert, and just hand start that hardware. Each one of these is going to get 3, and each load bar clamp will get the exact same assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and set up all 8 of these, and they should look just like this. This is a big front section here, that's why it's all the way up. And then I don't have that tight at all. I can still push that back and forth by hand like that. I want all this play. It makes putting these roof racks on by yourself much easier. And once I've got that threaded insert started like that, then I'm just going to do the same thing with the remaining 7 feet. So I've got the feet separated like this. I've got 6 that are set up the exact same way, and then I have the 2 that are pushed all the way up that will go at the front of the vehicle. Now I need to gather up some tools and we'll talk about the next step. You're going to notice that there are two different bags of spacers in your kit. One of the bags has 12 longer spacers in it. The other bag has 4 shorter ones. I'm going to go over where these go on the vehicle. It's really important that you get them in the right spot. But for this step right here, we also need some silicone sealant. It doesn't matter what kind you use or where it came from. Doesn't matter what color it is. What matters is the exterior grade, outdoor rated, pure silicone sealant. We get ours at Home Depot. You can get it at virtually any hardware store. Just make sure that you have outdoor rated stuff. I'm going to show you guys the driver's side of the vehicle. I've masked and taped it off on this side and kind of put a cheat sheet up here for us. Obviously, back foot clamp all the way down. This is the rear of the vehicle, and the spacers that go here are 875, so those are going to be the longer ones in your kit. Then I advance forward. This is the back of the back door here, like there's the tire. This clamp also all the way down, and there's a 1/2 inch set of spacers that go here. Then advance forward. This is the split between the front and rear door. Rear, third from the rear clamp, clamps all the way down, 875 spacers. And then finally the front foot, which is just on the other side of the back of the front door here, 875 spacers, clamp all the way up. I'll reference this some more as we do this install, but right now I'm going to set up my stool, get my sealant and my spacers, and we're going to put those on. I'm at the rear of the vehicle now. I've got my sealant. I'm going to start by pumping the inside of that plastic collar full of sealant, and then just working my way out to form a nice puddle all the way around it to make a base for that spacer to push down into. The same thing in both locations. Now, let me set this up like that. I've got the bag with the 12. I have 875 spacers in it, okay? That one bag with the 4, just to show you guys the difference between the length. This is the 1/2 inch spacer that will go further to the front of the vehicle. If I put those beside each other, they are nowhere near the same height. Save these short ones, we're going to use them in a bit. So I take 875 spacer, line it up, push it down around that collar so that it seats completely. Give it a good twist, and then you should have 2 spacers completely bedded in silicone right there. And again, that's at the rear of the vehicle, 875 spacers. So now I just follow this forward to the next location, 1/2 inch spacers. So I'm going to apply the silicone to these factory inserts here, and then we're going to install the 1/2 inch spacers in this location. So 1/2 inch here, and you can see it if you look across the top, those just kind of disappear, and then at the back they're still sticking up a little bit. But rear of the vehicle 875, next location 1/2 inch. Third location from the rear, you're going to be back on your 875 spacers. Third location from the rear, or second from the front. The next location is the front on the driver's side, also 875 spacers. Recap, front 875, second from the front 875, third from the front 1/2 inch, and finally rear 875. Now go set yourself up and do the same thing on the passenger side of the vehicle. If you're installing an Alpha roof rack and everything went your way, none of the factory inserts got screwed up and you didn't have to replace them with plus nuts, then you want the hardware from bag 8001.8. If you're doing a Bravo rack and again everything just went swimmingly and you didn't have any issues, you want the bag of hardware that just says rack to roof. In those cases, that's going to be M8 hardware and you'll use M6 Allen wrench to tighten everything up. If you did have to replace some of the factory inserts with the provided plus nuts, you're going to use the hardware that was in the bag with those plus nuts. You'll be using the 5mm Allen wrench, and these bolts are M6. When you guys put the feet together, you know, 6 of them were the exact same, 2 of them were a little bit different. The 6 that are the same are going to go at the rear location, the location second from the rear, and the location third from the rear, with the 2 remaining taller ones going at the very front of the vehicle up here in the last factory location. The rack to roof hardware for the Alpha and Bravo are the exact same. In a perfect world where you didn't have to install the plus nuts, you'll have the larger M8 bolts. Each one gets a lock washer and a fender washer, and there will be 16 of them total. Now on the prototype vehicle that I'm working on, we did have trouble with the factory inserts. In 2 locations I had to replace the factory inserts with the plus nuts, and they're going to take this smaller diameter, same length M6 bolt. In these applications, the head on the larger bolt is a 6mm, this is a 5. So I'm starting at the rear location on the driver's side of the vehicle. I've got my load bar assembly clamp here, this guy's facing the inside. It is important to note that we bend these all in the same direction. So on one side of the vehicle, they're going to be facing forward. On the opposite side of the vehicle, they'll be facing the other way. Perfectly okay. In fact, it works out to be a little bit stronger that way just because it helps prevent load bar twist during assembly. So I'm going to take the foot, see the 2 holes at the bottom. Go ahead and drop that hardware through. Then line up the studs of the bolts through the spacers. Seat that down, give it a few turns by hand just to make sure that the threads engage completely. And then I'll use a 6mm Allen wrench to tighten this up fully. Where you need to leave this loose and this loose temporarily, these can be fully tightened right now. And for all you torque sticklers out there, it's 135 inch-pounds is the final amount that you want on these bigger bolts. If you messed up the factory threads and you have to use the M6, it'd be 105 inch-pounds. So I've got those cranked down by hand. I'll go ahead and grab my torque wrench and follow myself along. This is the back. Rear foot on the driver's side, that same height foot will go here and here, leaving nothing but the front one for the taller feet. I move from the rear location, just follow the drip rail down. The next available location, same practice. Throw the bolts through the foot, line the bolts up with the threaded inserts. And again, you want to thread these in by hand just to make sure that the threads are engaged. Do not use an impact for this under any circumstances. That would be a terrible idea. Just set them by hand. If you've got them making as many turns as these are by hand, we're not cross-threaded, we're not messing up the factory threads, and we're not going to have any problems. So once I have those torqued down like that, put a turn on them with the ratchet with the 6mm. And then put the torque wrench on them. That one's good. Now we're going to move on to the next one. So this is the 3rd foot from the rear. It's closer to the front of the vehicle, but it's not ultimately the front foot. So just as we did with the other 2 in the video, I'm going to drop those in place, start those threads by hand. And it's pretty cool. This one's in really good shape. So I'm actually able to take this almost all the way down just by hand and then put the ratchet on. to snug them, and then finish it up with the torque wrench. So on the driver's side of the vehicle right now, I have 3 feet in place. I want to go put the same 3 feet, the ones left over from the 6 that you started with, on the passenger side at those 3 locations. Then we'll come back and do the front. The rear location on the passenger side is one of the threaded inserts that I had mess up from the factory, and I had to install plus nuts here. So I will be installing the M6 hardware in this location, and we'll be using the 5mm Allen wrench for that step. So I've got my M6 hardware here. I need to set my torque wrench up with my 5mm, as well as the ratchet. Exact same idea, even though the hardware is now a different size, doesn't matter. Still going to drop through the holes, line up with those spacers, wiggle it around until it engages each plus nut, and then just like a factory thread, put this in all the way down by hand, should just thread right in. If it doesn't, you'll want to repair those M6 threads. Don't try and force it. Couple of turns with the ratchet just to get it seated. Readjust my torque wrench. Again, that's 105 inch-pounds if you're using the M6 hardware. Leave it loose like this. We're tight here. I'm going to move on to the next location. This factory location, which is the second from the rear, these factory threads are intact. They're in good shape. This is also where those 1/2-inch spacers are at. So I'm going to drop those bolts in place, line them up over the spacers, and again, just thread them down by hand. You'll notice this whole thing is literally doing the same thing 6 times just to make sure everything's on the up and up. Okay. Because this factory hole wasn't damaged, I need to switch back to my 6mm stuff. So snug it down with the ratchet. Swap out our torque wrench back to 6mm and set our torque back to 135 inch-pounds. Now we're ready to move on to the last one of the feet that we have that are at the lowest position. This will be the 1, 2, 3, third location from the rear of the vehicle on the passenger side. This third location is also in really good shape, so it's still got the factory threaded inserts in place, so M8 hardware. And just like with every other spot, just thread them by hand. Once they're snug, tighten them up with the ratchet, and then set them with the torque wrench. Now we need to move on and do the front feet. I'm going to go do the driver's side first, so I'll reset everything, we'll talk about that one, and then we'll be ready to go. I'm at the front location on the driver's side of the vehicle, so I have one of the 2 remaining feet that are pushed all the way up in adjustability here. They mount the exact same way. Bolts through the feet, line the feet up to the spacers, hand tighten them in place. Snug them up with the ratchet. and put the last little crank on with the torque wrench. Our driver's side is ready. So front foot in the full upright position like that. The 3 remaining feet are all the way down. So bolt holes lined up here and there, and then finally the rear of the vehicle. I'm going to go install the last front foot, then we'll be ready to put some load bars on the truck. All 8 feet are installed. If you look down the passenger side, you look down the driver's side, this is where we need to be. Whether you're installing an Alpha or a Bravo roof rack, it doesn't matter. You need to get to this location in the installation first. I'm going to go ahead and remove this masking tape and get it out of the way. Then we'll be ready to feed the first 4 load bars onto the vehicle. So just to recap, whether you're installing an Alpha or a Bravo, you should be to this point. You should have all 8 feet on the roof. Everything is all sealed up. Your clamps are sitting there waiting for load bars. At this point, all 8 clamps are on the roof. I'm ready to install the first 4 load bars across the roof of the vehicle that will become the structure that support the sides of your roof rack. All 8 of your extrusions are the exact same. They can go in any location in the roof rack. I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to set the camera up and I'll show you guys. You're just going to align them to those threaded inserts that you put on the tops of the feet. You're going to slide it from one side of the vehicle to the other. Then you'll go to the other side of the vehicle, pick it up, and align it like that so that the load bar sets in position. You're going to do that 4 times, regardless of whether or not you're installing an Alpha or a Bravo. Once those load bars are on the roof, that's when this video becomes task specific. You'll want to watch the section of the roof rack that you actually purchased. I'm at the rear of the vehicle. I'm going to start with the back feet. Your load bars have a 2-inch side and a 1-inch side. It's the 1-inch side that threaded insert is going to pair into. Let me move this guy over here, see if I can get this adjusted so you guys can see. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to take the 1-inch side, I'm going to line it up to that threaded insert like that, and then just slide the load bar across to the other side of the vehicle. And I just take it over there and perch it on top of the other one. I'll do the same thing with the other 3 positions, and I'll go to the other side of the vehicle, pick them up and get them started like this right here. So all 4 load bars are started on the driver's side. You can see how they're locked into that 1-inch side. Threaded inserts are in that channel. On the passenger side, they're just sitting in place. So now I'm going to move everything over to the other side and get the passenger side load bars to line up like this. On the passenger side, I just pick the foot up. I can slide the load bar back towards the driver's side. I align that threaded insert like that right there, and then just walk it back towards me. This spacing right now doesn't matter at all. Do the same thing at the remaining 3 locations. Once all 4 load bars are on the vehicle like this, you're ready to proceed to the specific Bravo or Alpha section of the video. For you guys installing a Bravo rack, continue just watching along. I'm putting a Bravo rack on this truck first. Then we'll disassemble it and we'll put the Alpha rack on. The guys that edit this video will mark the location down in the timestamp of the video to save you guys time and keep you from missing any important steps. So if you're doing a Bravo, keep watching. The 3 major components for your Bravo roof rack consist of the sides It's important to note that on a Bravo roof rack, the sides can be used as either driver or passenger. There's nothing that indicates one side being proprietary from one to the other. So you can literally make either one of these panels a driver or passenger side. You also have your windscreen. You'll notice throughout this video that the windscreens that we install are no cut. This is a customer preference. Depending on what you ordered from us, your windscreen could look a little different from this. If it's cut for a light bar, it would also have additional hardware that's not covered in this video. I recommend you guys go watch our windscreen lighting guide video. It spreads a lot of information across how to mate light bars, get them aligned properly, and mounted up. So we're going to start by anchoring one side of the roof rack to the driver's side of the vehicle. I want you guys to grab the hardware bag that says load bars and a 5/32 Allen wrench. Inside that bag of hardware that says load bars on it, for the Bravo roof rack, you're going to have a bunch of 1-inch bolts and lock washers. Each load bar will receive 2 of these bolts at each end of the load bar, so 4 total per load bar. And you need to go ahead and preload the lock washers onto the bolts like this right here. That's going to speed everything up when we go to anchor the sides. I'm going to start by anchoring the driver's side to the 4 load bars that you've got installed to the roof rack so far. I'll go ahead and get it into position, get the hardware started, then I'll grab the camera and show you guys the details about how this lines up. If you look along the roof rack, there are machine slots across the tops. That's the location that the load bars are going to attach throughout most of these situations. At the very rear of the roof rack, there are 3 holes here. We'll come back and talk about those later. First, we want to get the side of the roof rack anchored to the 4 load bars that are already on the vehicle. I'm just going to go and start my hardware by hand, then we'll talk about the position. I've got the hardware started in all 4 locations where I have a load bar on the driver's side. So not back here, but in that first slot there. Skip the slot, now the next one, skip another slot, then the next one, and then the one right beside that one at the front of the vehicle, which just leaves that last slot up there at the front. Now, I want to take the roof rack side to the load bar, and I want to slide it to where the load bar is nested all the way back in the slot like that right there, and tighten up those bolts with a 5/32 Allen wrench. I've got the rear location tightened. Now I'm just going to go to the next location and do the same thing. Rear, second from rear. Now go to the third from rear, which is also the second from front. Seat it back like that and tighten it to where the load bar is all the way in the back of the slot facing the rear of the vehicle. That's the third from the rear, tightened up right there. That just leaves the front location. You don't have anything here yet. It's the second from the front right here. Once you've got the driver's side mounted to the truck like that, go do the same thing on the passenger side with the exact same hardware and your 5/32 Allen wrench. Next, we're going to install the rear load bar. The rear load bar is going to mount in these 2 vertical holes back here. So this rear load bar will actually be vertical where this one is horizontal. We've done that to give you guys more mounting options for lighting and stuff on the back of the vehicle, but it also makes the rear of the rack exponentially stronger. The load bars have less deflection when they're vertical than they do when they're horizontal. So just line up the 2 holes at the back of the rack right here, to the two holes in the end of your load bar and put them together with the same hardware set and 5/32 Allen wrench. And because there's no adjustability in this load bar, once you have the hardware tightened, you can go ahead and fully seat that hardware completely. Tighten that guy up. And then the same thing on the bottom hole. Now go do the same thing on the passenger side. Once you have the rear load bar installed, you should have about 1/8 of an inch of clearance between the back of the antenna and the front of the back load bar. So now we're going to install the remaining 2 load bars in the midsection of the roof rack. These load bars can be installed anywhere within these slots, and you can always adjust them later. But for now, I'm just going to put them in and push them all the way back so that cosmetically they match the rest of them. So grab your hardware and install these 2 load bars. At this stage, 7 of the load bars are in. In fact, all of the load bars except for the one at the very front of the roof rack. We want to leave that roof rack, or I'm sorry, we want to leave that load bar, I was trying not to fall and break my neck. We want to leave that load bar out until after we install the front windscreen. It leaves you some extra room up there for tools and hardware. So the next step of this is going to be to install your windscreen to the front of the roof rack. If you're installing lighting along with your windscreen, please go check out the video on how to mate your light bars into our windscreens. It'll save you guys a lot of confusion. And in a lot of instances, you want that light bar in there before you put the windscreen in the vehicle. This one is a no cut, so I'm going to set myself up to show you guys how to put a windscreen in by yourself. If you have a second person, it'd be really nice to have a second pair of hands on the other side of the truck. But most of the time when we're shooting these prototype vehicles and installation videos like this, I'm down here in the cave by myself, so I'm going to show you guys how to do this on your own. A couple of things to note here. You guys want the hardware in the bag labeled windscreen or fairing, and you're going to be lining up the machined holes in the end of your windscreen here to the machined holes at the end of your roof rack, right here. And the flanges on the windscreen will always go behind the armor plate towards the inside of the vehicle on both sides. So I'm going to set the camera up and then I'll put this together. Then I'll show you guys a close-up of the hardware. Notice that I stuck a number 2 screwdriver through the front top hole for the windscreen on the other side. That's going to allow me to set the windscreen from one side of the vehicle to the other and align that flange to that screwdriver. So that it'll help hold that side in place so I can start my hardware over here on the driver's side. Once I've got the hardware holding this side up, I'll just go remove the screwdriver and put the hardware on the other side. I'm over on the passenger side now and you can see that screwdriver I've got stuck through the holes. So I'm just going to pinch the two together, remove the screwdriver, line up a bolt through the machined holes in the windscreen and the side of the roof, and put the nut on. Now before you guys go busting my ass in these videos about these being flange nuts, as soon as this video is done, I have to turn around and take this off and put the nylocks on for the Alpha. So your hardware kit will have nylon lock nuts for this step. On the Bravo video, I get to use flange nuts. So that's what it should look like on the inside. This is how it lines up on the outside. Now I need a 3/16 inch Allen wrench for the outside and a 1/2 inch wrench for the inside, and I'm going to snug those down. Now that we've got the windscreen installed, we need to throw in that front load bar. There are a couple of mounting options for the front load bar, so let me get my stuff together. We'll go up there and check out the different ways that you can mount that load bar. Alrighty, at the front of the roof rack, you have one horizontal slot and then machined holes underneath that in 4 different locations. This front load bar can be mounted just like the rest of them here where they're horizontal flat, and in that case you would use this slot and you can adjust it anywhere inside of this slot to get better alignment for light bars. You can also flip them vertically and use the top of the slot here and then the bottom for the hole so that the load bars are mounted in like this at 4 different positions. We give you guys that option just because it's more and more common for people to use the larger light setups like the LP4s, 6s, and 9s. Those are big, heavy light settings. It's not unusual for like a bank of 6 LP6s with all of its hardware to weigh 60, 70 pounds. And you want that to be as sturdy as you can. So if you're running the larger light bar setups, I definitely recommend that you pick the position that makes sense. You can always adjust it later, but run that front bar vertically. This windscreen has no cut in it. There's no lighting going in the front of this roof rack. So I am going to mount it horizontally in this slot. And in the instance where you mount it to a roof rack that doesn't have other gear loaded on it, you want to keep that front load bar pushed all the way forward in that slot so that it's as close to this windscreen as possible. That's going to be your quietest configuration for wind noise. So at this point, you guys have a fully assembled roof rack. All that's left is to center the rack on the truck using the adjustability in the load bar feet, tighten those up, and then tighten up the bolts that attach the clamps to the feet that you mounted to the vehicle in the first step in the drip rails. So for this next step, you need a 5/32 Allen wrench and a tape measure. So there's a bit of math involved to get this right. Basically, we're just going to be taking our tape measure, and we're going to make some calculations between the driver and passenger side using the adjustability right now where the rack will slide across this clamp to pull it from the driver or passenger side. And an accurate way to measure this is to set your tape measure and measure from the inside edge of the roof rack to the outside edge of this load bar clamp. And I'll show you guys a detail here. So I'm just taking that number right there. And then I'll go compare that on the passenger side and make the adjustment to shift the rack from left to right to make sure that it's centered. And once I have that, I'll be ready to tighten up the bolts at the back of the rack. Then you just complete that process all the way down the front of the rack from one side to the other to make sure that you have it dialed on and center. So I've got the math on this one. I'm at about 4 1/16 of an inch in space between the outside of the clamp and the outside of the rack on both sides. There will be variances from one vehicle to the other. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. So it's important that you do your own math at every location. But again, I ended up at about 4 1/16. So now I'm ready to start to tighten these 5/32 bolts in the load bar. I want to snug them up, and I want to make sure that the top of this clamp is even with the top of this load bar before I tighten them down completely. See how it's flush like that? So I've got this one set. Let me do the other two, then I'll go do the other side. The back load bar is fully tightened on both sides. We haven't tightened up these clamp bolts inside of here yet. That's the last step. But now you guys take your tape measure and your 5/32, work your way all the way down the vehicle from driver side to passenger side, making those corrections and shoring the rack up to make sure that it's centered on the vehicle. Once you know it's centered, go ahead and tighten up all your load bar hardware. So now that we've got the rack centered and all that hardware is tightened up across all the load bars, all that's left is to tighten up the bolts that connect the base feet that you mounted to your drip rails to the clamps that are attached to the load bars. For your Bravo roof rack, you're going to need a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench. I'll explain again that the way we shoot these videos, when we have a configuration that gets an Alpha and a Bravo, ultimately the hardware that we're using for certain steps is rack specific. When this vehicle goes home, it'll have an Alpha rack on it, so the hardware that we're using to attach the clamps to the bases are Imperial hex head bolts. So you'll see me using 1/2-inch wrenches, kind of working them against each other to get those bolts to tighten up. On your Bravo roof rack and the hardware kit that ships to you, you'll be using a 5mm Allen. I suggest an L key to get into the area, and then a 13mm ratchet wrench to tighten everything up. So the bolts that we need to tighten are the 2 bolt and lock nuts that mount the clamp to the actual base here. So I've got a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches, and just one more time, just for clarification so we don't get a ton of emails, the hardware that I'm using here is for an Alpha rack. Yours would be button head, so you'd use a 5mm on the outside here and a 13mm wrench on the inside where I have this. So your L key would go right in this area. Let me move my hand. L key would go into the inside of the rack here, and the wrench on the outside. I'm just going to work my way around the rack, and I'm going to tighten them up. There'll be 8 bolts per side, 2 per foot. Once we get those tight, we'll go over the torque specs on the rack, couple fine details on it. You guys will be ready to rock and roll. Once you've got those clamps tightened up, your install is pretty much done. Just refer to the chart at the end of this guide. It's got all the torque specifications. Make sure you work your way around the rack, tighten that up. Check that stuff after heavy usage, especially after big off-road trips, stuff like that. things will work themselves loose. It's basic upkeep just like the rest of your vehicle. If you find any missing or damaged parts, just reach out to us, support at uptopoverland.com. That concludes the Bravo section of this. If you're doing the Alpha rack, go to that section. You guys will be ready. This portion of the video covers the assembly and installation of the Alpha roof rack for the LC200 vehicle. Before you get to this step, you should already have the feet mounted to the roof, the load bars installed to the roof in the 4 locations outlined earlier in this video. First, we'll start by going over the different pieces and parts of your Alpha rack and some of the modifications that you might want to make depending on the accessories that you're adding to the rack during installation. But for now, let's get the camera set up and go over the goodies. The Alpha rack's major components are the armor that goes on the outside of the rack, and then the Groove Tech, which is the inner core of your rack. This is where your wiring, if you're installing it, will attach to. And then you'll have your windscreen. We'll talk about the windscreen in a bit. You'll also have your grab handles. The remaining parts of your Alpha kit should already be on the roof of your vehicle. That includes the 8 feet, the load bar clamps, 4 of the load bars, and then the remaining load bars that come with your kit. For your Groove Tech, there is a driver and passenger side. That's dictated because we install rib nuts before we ship this to you. These gold rib nuts are where your armor will attach to. And if I flip this up, you see how one side is flat, flush to the outside edge, and the other side has a protrusion. The protrusion will always go to the inside of the roof of the vehicle. It will never stick out facing you when you put the Groove Tech on. If you have that, you've done it wrong. The Groove Tech has 2 holes at the front. This snout that drops down, this actually goes to the front of the vehicle. And then back here would be your rear. And then the same corresponding shape for your armor. This is the rear of the armor. And the front of the armor is distinguished by gills. Now, under normal circumstances, there's no driver and passenger side for the armor, but we're installing scene pods into this roof rack. So once you put them in, they need to face the outside. So this is your driver's side and this is your passenger side now. You're gonna start by anchoring one piece of Groove Tech to the driver's side, the other piece to the passenger side. I've got this set up. I'll hang the first piece, then I'll come back and talk about the locations that we're aiming for the load bars to make sure that we have the Groove Tech centered on the vehicle the right way. The hardware that you use for the interior load bars, which will be the first load bars that you anchor to your Groove Tech, that hardware is going to come out of bag 8001.2, and you'll use a 5/32 Allen wrench to set that hardware. I want to show you, if you follow along the tops of your Groove Tech, you have these machine slots in them. All of these slots through the interior of the roof rack, that's where those load bars are going to go. Your front load bar and rear load bar will mount to these back sections, and we'll cover those in a bit. They use different hardware. So I've got the driver's side started. I want to go do the same thing on the passenger side. That way when we're putting this together, I'm kind of assembling the whole rack all at once, not just one side. So I have one bolt started by hand in the rear. I have another bolt started by hand up here at the front. You can see the other 2 load bars that we've got to get started. Each of these locations is going to get 2 of the bolts and lock washers out of your 8001.2 kit, and each one needs to have a lock washer slid over, and then you just line up the bolt to the threaded insert in the end of the load bar here. And you start all those locations by hand. Then you can set them in with a ratchet. Don't fully tighten anything yet. We'll talk about the position of the Groove Tech inside of here. You see it moves back and forth. There's a position that you guys will have to set that in. So go ahead and put 2 bolts here, 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 and here across the load bars on the roof on both sides of the vehicle. I've got both sides started now, so the passenger and driver groove tech are attached to all 4 load bars that are on the roof. And remember, all this hardware up in here at every location, that's all still loose, so I can kind of move everything around. If you look at the length of the slot, to put this roof rack in the right position, you want to make sure that the groove tech is pushed all the way forward to the front of the vehicle so that the hardware bottoms out in this slot. You're going to leave this gap here at the front. That sets the proper spacing so that the armor profile will follow the vehicle the way that it's supposed to. Once you have them pushed all the way forward, take your 5/32 Allen wrench and tighten up all 8 bolts on both sides of the vehicle. So I've got my hardware all set. The groove tech's pushed all the way forward to the front of the vehicle. There are 2 more load bars in the interior of the rack, here and here. Those are the last 2 load bars that will use the same hardware from that 8001.2 kit. So go ahead and put them on the truck, put the hardware in. They can go anywhere within this slot. It doesn't matter where they go, and you can adjust them. We give you guys a little bit of wiggle room in there to help line up on things like rooftop tents and big pieces of gear. So yeah, you can put those last 2 load bars any location in that slot that you want, but let's get those 2 load bars on the roof rack now. I shoot most of these videos by myself just because our schedule here is crazy, but I've lined up, I've set 2 load bars up on the roof. They're going to align to these last 2 slots right here. Just kind of going to drop them in, and then I'll start the hardware by hand. You guys do the same thing at this location and then go over to the other side, pick them up, put the hardware in them. When I tell you that they can be in any part of this slot that you want them in, it doesn't matter where they go, but what does matter is that wherever it is on the passenger side is where it would be on the driver's side. You want that load bar to be parallel across the roof rack. It can't be sitting in there at an angle like that. It'll cause all this to bow and give you guys serious alignment issues when you go to attach your armor. We've got the first 6 load bars in the groove tech. The last 2 load bars go at the front and rear of the vehicle. They'll use hardware from bag 8001.1, and you'll need a 7/16 inch or an 11mm wrench or socket with a ratchet. There are some mounting configurations that you can do with the front and rear load bar. So once I get up on the vehicle and get the camera set, I'll show you guys the options that you have and why we provide them. At the rear of the vehicle, you're going to notice that you have 2 holes facing horizontal like this, and then a corresponding set of holes vertically. See the shark fin antenna? The reason that you want this pushed where it is because in this vertical position, that load bar will clear that shark fin antenna, still gives you a ton of mounting surface at the rear of the vehicle, and load bars when they're mounted vertically are infinitely stronger than when they're mounted horizontally like this across the span of a roof. So the reason that we provide that on the LC200 is that the design platform of this rack fits a broad range of model year from 2007 to 2021. So if you're working on an LC200 and you don't have a shark fin antenna back here, you're welcome to put that load bar in any configuration back here that fits your needs. If you have the shark fin antenna, you're going to want to mount it vertically. So I'm going to be putting this one in vertically. The hardware from 8001.1 are hex bolts. Each hex bolt is going to get a lock washer and a flat washer, so they should look like this. Okay, I'll set the camera up and move this guy around a little bit. Let me drop my load bar in, and you'll see it falls right behind the antenna. You got about an 1/8 inch gap between the antenna and the back of the load bar there when it's all bolted up. So your hardware goes in like this. So you see this slot in here, or in here if you had it mounted horizontally. Those slots are machined in so that you guys can pass wiring through from one side of the rack to the other and keep everything hidden and protected. So it gives you the channel to run your wiring down one side and then take it and send it through that slot, which will keep it inside that load bar. And across the back of the vehicle to get from one side to the other, everything stays clean. You can't see it, you're not gonna trip over it, you're not gonna catch it with gear and damage your wiring. It's just a really neat feature that comes with the Alpha Rack. I've got the hardware started here. I'm gonna go start the hardware on the other side and I'll come back and tighten them up. Hardware's in, gap between the load bar and antenna is good. Now we'll move to the front of the vehicle and put in the front load bar. So the front load bar, just like the rear load bar, can be mounted horizontally across this top slot or at any of these 4 positions vertically across here. The reason that you guys would want to mount that vertically, the nature of lighting systems is changing. Guys are running just huge arrays of lights, LP4s, 6s, 9s, in big banks when you're running 4 or 5 of them on a roof rack. By the time you get them and all the wiring and everything else in there, you can easily have, 60, 70 pounds of lighting at the front of the roof rack. In instances where you're running those larger light setups, I strongly recommend that you run that front load bar vertically. They're a lot stronger, they're less prone to deflection, and that's gonna make your lighting setup a hell of a lot more stable. If your load bar's bouncing on the trail, then your lights are bouncing out in front of the vehicle, and it's just not the way we intend this to work. So giving you guys the ability to flip that front load bar vertically makes them strong enough to hold these huge light setups that you see a lot of people running now. This vehicle ultimately gets no lighting in the front, so this front load bar is going to be installed horizontally across that slot. So in this one, I'll just line it up across here, put the bolts in just like we did in the rear, go to the other side and then adjust it. If you were running it vertically, these machine channels are here to help you guys pass wiring through to the other side of the vehicle, just like in the back. So I try really hard to design these roof racks to be as close to silent as they can be on the vehicle. I don't want to give you guys something that adds a ton of wind noise or vibration and just drives you insane and ruins your trip, right? One of the things that I've learned over time is that when you're installing your windscreen and you're not going to be running a lot of gear up on the top of the vehicle, you want to run this front load bar pushed all the way forward so that it's as close to that windscreen as it can possibly be. If you don't, then wind cuts through, gets caught in this front channel and screams like a banshee, right? So once you start loading the vehicle up with gear, that becomes less important. And if you're going to be putting storage cases and a rooftop tent and all this crazy stuff up here, you can kind of put anything that you want on the roof rack at any given time. And once you're going to load it with gear, you can adjust this load bar as needed to line up stuff. I'm going to push it all the way forward and tighten it up. And once I've got that cranked down, I need to go tighten up the other side, but then we'll be ready to install the windscreen. These 2 holes at the front of the groove tack are where your windscreen's going to attach to. Same thing on the other side, and the flanges on your windscreen will fold to the inside here. They'll never be on the outside, they'll be here. So I've got to do this by myself, so I'm going to set the camera up and show you guys how I put a windscreen on alone. If you've got somebody to help you do this step, it's a whole lot easier to do with 2 people than it is to do by yourself. But I've put the whole roof rack design is kind of built with the idea that you guys would put this on in your driveway and you may not necessarily have somebody there to help you. That's why this one goes on in steps and stages across the roof. You don't have to pick up this 8-foot long roof rack and stick it on top of the vehicle. So I'm gonna get my stuff together to do the windscreen and we'll put that part on next and then we'll be ready to move on to the wiring and the armor. So this customer's requested a windscreen with no lighting in the front of the roof rack. So the windscreen that ships in this kit, solid across the front and then contoured to match the roof of the vehicle at the front. Yours may look a lot different than this. You could have notches, you could have machined holes, you could have all kinds of other stuff because our windscreens are designed to mate with very specific lighting applications to cut down on wind noise and make these guys close to quiet as we can get them. If you're installing lighting to your roof rack, I suggest that you check out our video about mating light bars and different lighting setups into the windscreens of the upTOP roof racks. Some of them you'll need to install the light bars before you put on the windscreen, and in other applications we find that it's easier that you do it after. So if you're installing lighting, go check that video out and save yourself a bit of headache. So I've got my windscreen up here. I've already set the hardware on top of the load bar, so it's easy for me to get to from both sides. You guys want the hardware out of bag 8001.3. You're also going to need a 5mm Allen wrench and a 13mm open end wrench so that you can set the hardware. First, my main concern is getting it across the vehicle and getting the hole in the side of the flange here lined up to that shank of the screwdriver that I've stuck through the other side without doing damage to the vehicle. So if I just pick this up and hand it over, I can line it up on that shank. That'll support that side. Then I can drop this side in place and slide the bolts through to hold the windscreen so I can do the same thing on the other side. So I'm gonna go set the bolts up on that side, then we'll come back and reposition the camera to show you guys how to bolt this thing in place. When I move over to the passenger side, now you can see my screwdriver that I've got stuck in here to hold it. I just support the windscreen with one hand, take out the driver, line up those holes, push that hardware through, then reach around on the back side and start those nylocks. Once I've got them started, I'll use a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench to crank them down all the way. I've got the other side started now, so 5mm on the outside. Just reach inside of the roof rack with the 13 to support the nylock, and then tighten them down. So inside of there, you guys can see the nylocks, and then on the outside, that's your bolt. So just a progress check at this point. Windscreen's in, all the load bars are in. All of this hardware is still loose so that we can adjust the rack to get it centered. Next is going to be the armor. If you guys are installing the optional scene pods when you're doing your roof rack, you're going to want to knock out the punch mark for the scene pods at the front of the rack through your groove tech. We've left extra material in here and a brace down here at the bottom because your last contact point on your vehicle is about 20 inches from the front of the roof rack. So we want as much stability through the front snout as we can. It's really rigid. So this little knockout would be in the way of the back of your scene pod. So if you're going to be installing scene pod lighting, this is a good time to go ahead and cut these out. If you don't know how to do that, again, check out our lighting guide. We cover every possible scenario in 3 or 4 different ways to cut those knockouts out of your roof rack parts. That way they're not in the way, give you guys plenty of clearance for your wiring. So I've got those scene pods chewed out of the way of the groove tech there. You can see the open hole. I've got it on both sides now just so I have that out of the way and have my clearance. I'm ready to start to attach the armor to the vehicle. You guys will notice in this video that the scene pods are already installed. Our technician's doing a lot of extra work to this vehicle, and it goes home 2 days from now. So in order to expedite this process, you're gonna see some wiring and stuff throughout this video that you will or will not do depending on whether or not you're gonna add a bunch of lighting to your roof rack. So that should explain and negate the whole, well, I don't have that wiring or mine doesn't have those lights. These are all customer selected options, and that's why you're gonna see them in this video. The first hardware set that you want is going to be bag 8001.5, armor to groove tech, and a 5mm Allen wrench. When you first put the armor on the vehicle, you're only going to anchor it at this rear hole here and this very front hole down here. The remaining 6 holes through the center, those are for the grab handles, and we'll go over those a little bit later. So for now, grab the hardware out of that bag, 5mm Allen wrench. I'll take this over to the truck and we'll get one piece of armor put on the vehicle. There's a bunch of hardware in that bag. You're going to take your bolt and apply a lock washer to each one. Ultimately, when you go to the vehicle, that's going to go through that hole, and the supplied spacer is going to go behind the armor over those studs between the armor and groove tech. When I lift the armor up in the air and go to align it, I'm going to aim for this brass rib nut at the rear of the roof rack and the brass rib nut at the front of the roof rack. So I'll set the camera up and put this piece on, and again, the remaining rib nuts throughout the middle, those are going to go to your grab handles, and we'll cover those later. Now that I've got that started, I'll take the 5mm and tighten that up. But before I do, I want to give you guys a close-up of what that actually looks like at the rack. So the bolt and lock washer went through the front side of the armor. The spacer is in between the armor and the groove tack. And then once I have everything lined up, I'll just tighten that up with a 5mm. And then we want to do the same thing at the rear. You guys have the exact same setup. There's a spacer in between there. Get that hardware started. And once it's started, we'll just tighten it with the 5mm. So that's the driver's side. Now go do the same thing on the passenger side. Once you've got the driver and passenger side armor started, you're ready to install your grab handles. They ship to you in a kit form and you do have to tie them yourself. If you haven't done so already or you're not familiar, go watch our video on how to tie handles. Drew did a bang-up job showing you guys step by step how we lace these things up and get them nice and tight so that they'll last for a long time and you can trust them. So I'm going to tie up my handles, then we'll be ready to put on the grab handles at all 3 locations on the driver and passenger side. Your grab handle hardware is in bag 8001.6. You're going to find a ton of these long bolts and lock washers and then a bunch of plastic spacers like that. So preload each bolt with a lock washer. Go ahead and get it started in the hole like this, push down on the handle, load your hardware through like that, and you can go ahead and put a spacer on each stud once you have that. Then we'll go and install them to the rack. The remaining spacer will go between the armor and groove tack. I'm at the front location on the driver's side. I've got my hardware handle loaded, 2 spacers installed. You're going to need a 5mm Allen wrench. I start by just passing them through the armor and lining up a spacer to go over the studs. And then push that through so that it's lined up like that. So you have a spacer between the lace plate and the armor, and then another spacer between the armor and the groove tack like that. Once you have them, you can just set with a 5mm and start them by hand. Once you've got those done, just snug them up a little bit. You'll come back at the end of this video and check out the torque specs. That's when you'll tighten everything up fully. So now go put on the 5 remaining handles. Now that we've got the armor and handles installed on both sides, one of the last steps is to adjust the rack center on the vehicle. So you're going to be able to shift it left to right and tighten it up. You're going to need a 5/32 Allen wrench and a tape measure for this step. We're going to be making some measurements versus the driver and passenger side, adjusting the rack to make sure that it's centered on the vehicle, and then finally tightening up those load bar clamps. After that, all we've got left are the 2 bolts that connect each load bar clamp to the base that's mounted to your drip rail. So let's grab a tape measure and a 5/32 and get this guy centered on the truck. To center the rack, you're going to repeat this process at all 4 sets of feet. So you've got 4 feet on the driver's side, 4 feet on the passenger side. You're going to make these measurements at each location, but you're going to do them 1 set of feet at a time. I'm starting at the rear of the roof rack at the rear set of feet. So I'll make my measurements on this side, go compare them on that side, make my adjustments left to right. Once I'm centered, I'll tighten up these load bar bolts right here. So to measure this accurately, just a standard tape measure, measure from the inside of your groove tack to the outside edge of that load bar clamp right there. I'll try and show you guys. I'm up, pushed in right here. So I'm measuring from here, the inside of the groove tack, to just the inside edge of that load bar clamp. I want to take that measurement on the driver's side, then I want to compare that to the measurement I did on the passenger side, and then adjust the rack. Once I'm satisfied with that number, I'll tighten up that hardware on that load bar and move to the next load bar. When I do racks that are built this way, I like to start at the back of the vehicle and then work my way to the front. When you're done, you should be able to look down your groove tech and it will just be razor straight. If you see a warble or a wave in it, you don't have your clamps set in the right place on your load bar. You've got your roof rack shifted at one location or the other, not centered, so basically left or right bias. So I'm going to go ahead and measure this up and start tightening these guys up. If you're installing this along with me, do the same thing. It's important to note that the numbers that I get may not be the numbers that you get. Again, this vehicle fits from 2007 to 2021. There are going to be manufacturing variances from model year to model year, and even in some cases from trim level to trim level. So just work your way across inside groove tech, outside of load bar clamp, and adjust the rack until your measurements on both sides of the vehicle are the same, and then tighten up that hardware. I've worked my way around the rack. I've measured and centered all 8 locations. I'm really dialed in down the side of the vehicle there. I've got all this hardware tight. What's left now is to tighten up the hardware that connects the load bar clamp to the foot. On the Alpha rack, that's going to be a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches. You'll just hold the bolt head in place and then use a ratchet wrench to do the inside edge to tighten them up. There are a total of 16 bolts for this. I'm not going to bore you guys with the mechanics of this, but I'll kind of show you. I just grab a hold of it on this side, and then I've got a ratchet wrench that lies and tells me which direction is which, and then I just crank those down till everything is tightened up. And once I've done that, I do the same thing with the remaining 15 bolts. So once you've got that, meet me on the ground and we'll talk about the button up of this roof rack. Once you've got the bolts clamped up between the load bar clamps and the feet, effectively your installation is done. Please refer to the guide at the end of this video for the torque specifications. Make sure that you torque all the hardware to specs that we provide to you. It's critical for the longevity of the roof rack. After extreme use, if you're packing big, heavy rooftop tents and things like that, periodically just check and maintain the roof rack the way you do the rest of the vehicle. Go over it from time to time, tighten everything up. If you come across any worn parts, you see something that needs to be replaced, you guys do have a lifetime warranty, so don't hesitate to reach out to support@uptopoverland.com. And if you have any technical questions or you run into a roadblock during the installation, feel free to reach out to us. We've got a whole army of guys here to answer all the questions that you might have.